was strong and said on that and said, yes, there is a relationship. That violence has a relationship to this violence. And it said that Lonmin created an environment conducive to the creation of tension, labour unrest, disunity amongst its employees, or other harmful conduct. And in the light of this, it recommended that Lonmin's failure to comply with its SLP obligations should be drawn to the attention of the Department of Mineral Resources, which should take steps to enforce performance of these obligations by Lonmin. I also think that the Commission contributed to policy debate. I think there's been much discussion about what happened at Marikana Commission and what sort of policies should be in place. But I think we also need to see that the report was not the only outcome of the Commission. There is a very valuable transcript, a word-for-word transcript of the whole Commission's hearings. And for researchers, for public advocacy people, for campaigners, for lawyers and so on, this is also an extremely valuable document. But of course the Commission had a number of weaknesses. As I've said before, judicial inquiries are appointed by the President, and as probably everybody knows here, there was a 3-month delay in the President releasing the report, and in this time he allowed the Provincial Commissioner Mbongo to retire so that she wouldn't have to account for her actions. Also, of course, many people would have watched it on television, he put his own presidential spin on the findings of the Commission, so he was very concerned to make sure that Cyril Ramaphosa and Nathi Mthethwa were exonerated from any blame. And this is not entirely true. In fact, the Commission's findings are very ambivalent about whether Nathi Mthethwa is to blame or not to blame for the violence. I don't think that the Commission was successful in creating a less adversarial environment than you would find in a kind of court case, and in order to make the truth much more accessible. Immediately from the beginning, you had human rights lawyers pitted against Lonmin and the police. And the terms of reference also polarized people. So the terms of reference are explained as, we will look at, and then they name names. We will look at Lonmin, we will look at NUM, we will look at AMCU, we will look at the police and so on. And so immediately people are put on the defensive. They started to look at, we're going to be prosecuted later. And so it's sort of, it created a very tense and conflictual environment rather than a more open-ended general investigation happening where the truth could emerge in a less sort of fraught situation. IPID gave advice to the police that, look, there are going to be negative findings from this, so you must get lawyers really quickly. In fact, what IPID should have been doing is saying, you know, you must be witnesses to the truth, you must go to the Commission, you must tell everything you know, and you must reveal everything. Their advice meant that the police immediately sort of felt we must get lawyers, we must make a plan, and it basically encouraged sort of their widespread deceit. And a lot of people have criticized the Commission for its first year of being delaying the truth, nothing coming out, you know, what's happening, Parliament is allowing people to ramble on forever and not stopping them and so on. In fact, I think the delays in the first year were mainly to do with the fact that lawyers were engaged in a discovery process where they were trying to get documents, media, witnesses and so on to tell the truth so that they could actually investigate the events. Lying is, of course, the greatest threat to inquiries. This is not only something that happens in South Africa, it happens elsewhere, but it happens very extensively in South Africa. And the truth is very often overridden by personal and political concerns. So if I can just give one example. Mbongo lied about scene 1, but particularly about scene 2. So she was in the Joint Operation Command Center. She'd been sent there to oversee everything that happened on August the 16th. People were killed at scene 1. In the JOC, it was heard from overhead, from the radio, from the helicopter overhead, bodies down, bodies down, bodies down. So she must have known that people were killed at scene 1. The evidence leader then said, well, why did you not stop it then so that there weren't further killings at scene 2? She said, I wasn't there, I was outside, I was in the toilet, the radio was crackling. I didn't know until long after that there were killings at scene 1 or scene 2, which of course was completely disproved. I think the report is soft on police mendacity. Okay, it does finger Piega and Imbombo for their perjury. But as I've said before, the Commission Act allows people to be charged for any kind of perjury commission. And the police perjured themselves right from the top to the bottom. And as I said, Lonman and security did as well. Judges don't have management skills, and this obviously impacts on inquiries. Some judges might have management skills, but they're not trained for that. They are trained as legal people. And there were lots of complaints from lawyers at the Commission that there was a haphazard order of examination, that there were unclear rules of procedure, that there was a lack of clarity around the terms of reference, that how to deal with evidence was very confused, and so on. And I just want to, with the latter case, in dealing with evidence, give an example. On phase 2, just to quickly explain, phase 1 was looking at the events that happened between the 9th and the 16th, to find the facts and the truth of what happened. Phase 2 was supposed to look at the underlying causes of the violence. And so there really was no discussion right from the beginning on how phase 2 would operate. How would evidence be led in phase 2? Would it be different from phase 1? Would it have its own budget? Would it have researchers? Would it be able to operate as a parallel commission? And because there was just no clarity, and the judge never really decided how or where this would be run, in April 2014 last year, the President decided to change the terms of reference, and he took out what was a large chunk of basically phase 2 of the Commission, where he took out that any investigation for the responsibility in the violence should not be investigated in relation to government agencies, departments, anything to do with government. And that was removed. So you couldn't investigate the DMR's role, the DOL's role, the credit regulators' role, and so on. But I think if it had been put in place and was given the kind of seriousness that phase 1 had been given, this would not have been possible. And of course, this is really quite a tragedy for the outcome of the Commission, because there are very, very few socioeconomic recommendations. The inquiry in the end mainly apportions blame. It's not a forward-looking policy document. There are some policy recommendations, but in general, they're not very strong socioeconomic recommendations. One of the weaknesses also of the Commission is just simply the problem of legalism. It was a judicial inquiry. So, legal processes tend to focus on the individual, not on the whole picture. I think that also this kind of approach, this legalistic approach, was reflected in the report, which if any of you have read it, is written very much like a court judgment. But I just want to give an example of how this legalistic approach sort of interfered with possible favorable recommendations. So everybody was shocked that there was no compensation recommended for the families of the deceased. There was one thing that the Commission could have done, and it didn't. And part of this was because the question that was asked at the Commission was, who fired the shots? Of course, they couldn't find out exactly who had killed who, and who had fired the shots and killed which particular minor, and so on. So it couldn't establish criminal liability. Because it couldn't establish criminal liability, it couldn't say the state was responsible for compensation. If, however, it had started from a different premise, and it had said something like, we saw people were shot by the police, therefore the police are culpable, therefore they must pay out compensation to the families, you would of course have had a very different outcome in the report. The legalism also impacted on recommendations on scene 2. There was a lot of evidence, as I've told you, on scene 2, but the report is very weak. It basically says there's just really was a lack of command capacity, it seemed to. Chain of command, I believe it could have made very strong recommendations. On the toxic relationship between the police and Lonmin, it basically said there wasn't a toxic relationship, but I've already spoken to you about the Mbongo Mokoena conversation, which was clearly a very toxic relationship. It was an embedded relationship. It wasn't, as one of the wives of the deceased said to me, I thought the police would be impartial and that they would broker between Lonmin and ourselves, but in fact they absolutely took sides. So I think there was this wild swing in the Commission between the balanced probability approach and the beyond reasonable doubt approach, i.e. that we had to find precisely which individual fired the shot and who did the killings and so on. If you've read the report, it's very sort of opaque, it's dense, it's ambiguous, it's very timid in its conclusions, very cautious, and so it looks like a very weak document. And very often, very good information that is embedded in the report in the Commission is simply not brought to its logical conclusion. This legalism, I believe, also lent it to having a very narrow perspective, the Commission having a very narrow perspective on certain things. So early on in the report, you get this statement. The tragic events originated from the decision and conduct of the strikers in embarking on an unprotected strike and enforcing the strike by violence and intimidation, using dangerous weapons for the purpose. So you immediately have this kind of feeling that the criminals are the strikers. They started the violence and unfortunately escalated, and of course the police got a little bit out of hand. Whereas I felt that in the Commission there simply wasn't the background of a context of worker rights. That in the Constitution, the right to strike is protected. You may be on an unprotected strike, but that doesn't make you a criminal. Maybe that you have to go through disciplinary procedures, you might be dismissed or whatever. But this issue of criminality at the Commission loomed very large. As you know, Ramaphosa was very keen to end the strike because they were criminals and so on. And so I really do feel that worker rights were very weakly represented as a backdrop to the Commission. So just some concluding remarks. So was the Commission expensive, cynical exercise in bearing the truth and protecting the powerful? Well, I think I've already shown that it established facts, that it refuted certain myths, and that it went beyond this to ascertain what went wrong and how to rectify this. It actually gave quite a number of recommendations. It wasn't a whitewash. The report was released undoctored. Okay, it was released late, but it was released undoctored. And I do believe that the Commission held integrity, unlike many other South African commissions of inquiry. On the issue of cost, a number of people said, well, we should have just dispensed with the Commission and used all that money that was used for the Commission on bettering housing, bettering services and so on for mine workers. But let's just look at a bit of a comparative base. The Marikana Commission cost 153 million rand. The Seriti Commission, 300 million. The Bloody Sunday Inquiry, 195 million pounds. I just thought to contrast this with Inkandla, which was for the President's own purposes, costing 248 million rand. I read in the newspapers last week that ghost workers in the Northwest Province cost taxpayers 900 million rand. So I suppose the question is really, are we willing to spend money on strengthening our democracy? Are we willing to spend money on governance issues? Or do we think that all resources should simply go towards the provision of services and infrastructure and so on? Nevertheless, within its own terms, within the parameters of what a commission can do, I do think the Commission could have gone a lot further. It could have made a lot more strong recommendations, and there were inexplicable things like there was never any cross-examination of the TRT foot soldiers on the ground. Hardly any of the mine workers, the strikers themselves, were cross-examined. And as I've already said, there could have been much stronger conclusions on things like compensation, the toxic relationship between Longman and the state, the chain of command, and scene 2, and so on.
Wow, thank you, Carl. Let's give her a round of applause. That was very insightful, Carly. Colleagues, I'm just going to give time now for questions and comments. I'm going to give 3 or 4 people maximum to quickly comment or ask questions, just straight to the point, so that most of us could have time to talk. Now, I can see one hand over there, a second hand at the back, and the third hand next to the door. I'll take those first 3 now. Oh, you had a hand up, eh? Okay, you'll get the 4th one. Come, Senator.
Thanks, Chairperson. My name is Trina Mahlachana. I'm from the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. The input that is made by Dr. Forrest, it's really interesting. And the most unfortunate part is that at the end, it comes up with too much confusion, and I don't think we are going to be able to sleep well, because you ought to think and balance whether the Commission has served its purpose and not. But one needs to highlight backwards, before 1994, we had a lot of similar incidents where, in fact, the word that was used were the inquest. For an example, the Biko inquest. But no one has ever been satisfied after those particular inquests. And then, after 1994, we have experienced the emergence of the so-called commissions. But at the very same time, in these particular commissions, it appears that nobody again, not everybody is going to be satisfied about the outcomes of the commissions, particularly the quotations that you have made when you started to make your commission, the one from Dale McKinley and one from the EFF leader. As we speak as South Africans, we remain confused. We don't understand whether the commissions are the structures that must be trusted or not to be trusted. But we depend on professional people like you, Doctor, to give us a direction and say, this is the route that needs to be done. These are the recommendations, particularly towards the judiciary system and the training of the police. As we speak currently, we are talking about the police that are maimed every day. We have had incidents at North Taxi Rank where two policemen have been killed. And we need a solution. One could conclude at some stage and say, maybe it is the wrath of Marikana, but who are these people that are beginning to attack the police on everyday basis? They are the citizens of the country. And as I sit down, there is a universal law that says, thou shalt not kill. And it is embedded in the South African Constitution, where it indicates that there is right to life. Whatever has happened, the most unfortunate part is that the majority of the Eastern Cape men that died at Marikana, will not be returned back by accusations that we are beginning to do as South Africans, pointing fingers to each other. Thank you.
Just 2 rules, I'm going to lay them again. Please state your name quickly, and then I'm going to ask colleagues again. Let's try to be concise with our comments and questions. The second hand, please. Yes, sir. Do you need a mic?
I can just speak,
Yeah, you can talk. I think we can hear you.
Just to make it short, 2 points that I want to make about this report by Gabriel. That, the first point is that, it is shocking in a post-apartheid environment whereby such huge killings, massacre happening. It reminds us of the past, 1960 and so forth. When now look at the democracy, such things still happening, it's just shocking. The last 2 points is that why the workers must die for when they reach their rights, of the living wage and living conditions. Why they die, because as we have said so, that in the constitution of the country, that it is ensuring that people have the right to area women. Why workers must die? And Chair, the last 2 points is that the culprits in this case, in my own opinion, I mean, you can prove it all. I suspect the police, those are the ones pulling trigger. That's number one. And who else is the culprit that the commission doesn't mark on much is the loaning company. They drag their feet and their feet and their feet to until the blood splash, They know that the living condition, people are living in the smaller camps, settlements, and their living wage is not above inflation rate. And finally, the families of those people must be reimbursed, compensated, because now there are court cases now that cost huge billions of rands. Those are the breadwinners, and in the future, finally, conclusion, in the future, we as Africans, government, different sector, all of this, to avoid this thing, what must be done? That's what must be done, because this thing was a big shock embarrassment to come in the whole world. But the big conditions must be met before anything happens, This avoid this thing, bring again, it was a big embarrassment for us in this country. Thank you very much.
But I didn't get your name, sir.
Oh, my name is Jacob Zuma.
Oh,
No, my name is Gregory.
thank you, Gregory. Okay, thanks, sir. The next speaker.
I wanted to check here. I'm not sure about if the report was released held with integrity. Because if you look at most of the lawyers there, even to Mr. Zeves, they've been casting aspersion over Falan and the commission itself, even going to an extent of saying Falan is Zuma's ally. And I